everyone. My name is Amrani Dominguez, and we are Team 11. Thank you so much for joining us at our presentation on Boeing's company narrative. Today, we will be exploring the story Boeing is trying to tell to the public, the challenges to that story, and the credibility gap that exists between the company's messaging and the public perception. Presenting alongside me today are Jacob Warren Dennis, Kurt Ryan Shelbelt, Skylar Matthews, and Trenton Nicholas Bell. Each one of us will walk through one part of the analysis, and together we'll offer insight on how Boeing could possibly bridge the gap between what it says and how it's seen.
Hello, everybody. The agenda for this presentation is as follows. Trenton will be talking about what story is Boeing trying to tell and why it matters. Following that, Skylar will be talking about the challenges that come with this story. After that, Mayrani will be talking about what the key issues are. Following that, Kurt will be then talking about who is impacted by these key issues. And lastly, Jacob will be talking about strengthening and rewriting these narratives.
Thank you. First, we will be going over what story the company is trying to tell. Boeing is trying to tell many different narratives at the same time. First, we'll be starting off how they are emphasizing an internal cultural shift. They will be shifting their schedule-driven mindset to a safety and quality-first culture. This process includes slowing down production rates, reworking internal inspection processes, accepting greater FAA oversight, investing in training and factory improvements. Boeing is showing the world that safety is now their top priority. Boeing has continued to show the world that innovation is at the forefront of the company. The company has talked about new aircraft concepts, advanced manufacturing, and supersonic exploration. Boeing has also shown an effort to innovate in sustainable aviation, spacecraft, military projects, and even in their factories. Maintaining status in an extremely competitive market such as aerospace is very difficult. Boeing has done this by framing itself as a foundational part of the global aviation industry. Even during times of hardship, the company stresses that they are committed to excellence, innovation, and safety. Lastly, like any company, Boeing has been telling the story of how they are better than their competitors. They do this with a mix of strategic messaging, national positioning, and company legacy. Boeing has had a long history of excellence, such as their 747, which revolutionized long haul travel, and their 777, which is known for its reliability and performance. Next, we will be looking at why these narratives matter. They matter for several reasons, such as Department of Defense contracts. These are very important due to profit, stability, credibility, and the long-term survival that they provide. During commercial downtimes, Department of Defense contracts offer steady revenue streams. An example of this would be during the COVID-19 pandemic, where there is a commercial downtime. DoD contracts help Boeing stay afloat. These contracts also boost company prestige, credibility, and technical validation. Boeing also cares about its company image because its business depends on being trusted to build safe aircraft, uphold national security, and manage billions in government contracts. Without a strong image, its technical excellence and global reach means far less, as well as not being able to attract top talent. Boeing also wants to stabilize investor sentiment because investor confidence is the lifeblood of their financial health, strategic flexibility, and long-term survival. This is especially important right now since the company is in a period of intense public scrutiny and operational instability. If investors don't have faith in the company, they won't invest in it, or even worse, go to a competitor. The morale and confidence of employees is also very important. If Boeing wants to continue to be a global leader in the aerospace industry, then they must first achieve the confidence of their employees. Workers and engineers must know that the leadership knows what's going on and have a plan to correct it. When the company morale is high, employees are more invested in the company and it creates an even more healthier working environment. Thank you. Next, Skylar will be going into the challenges that Boeing faces when trying to tell their narratives.
Thanks, Trenton. My name is Skylar. Over the next couple of slides, I'll be talking to you about the events and challenges that Boeing has faced that pose a risk to the story that they're trying to tell. Recent incidents that have been highly publicized pertaining to Boeing aircraft have posed challenges to the company's mission. One incident that presented a challenge to the company was the disaster of the 737 MAX production. The engineers of this jet relied on a single sensor to relay the angle of attack of the airplane, knowing the risk of sensor failure. When these aircraft were sold and released to the customers around the world, the result was the failure of that single sensor and 2 crashes that resulted in the death of 346 passengers. One of the most publicized stories as of late was Alaskan Airlines Flight 1282. Around 10 minutes into the flight, the door plug failed, resulting in the door being ripped off at about 16,000 feet in the air. Thankfully, no one was injured, but investigations later found that the door plug was installed without any bolts securing it. Finally, Department of Defense contracts. For a period of time, Lockheed Martin was consistently beating Boeing and securing large DoD contracts. This was due to several issues, to include cost overruns, quality issues, and the government's lack of confidence in the company to produce. Lockheed Martin was simply making a better product for a less price. Some examples of contracts lost to the competitors include hypersonic missile work, which resulted in a $1 billion contract, the F-22 Raptor, and the F-35 contract, which was an astounding $11.76 billion. But with Boeing winning the most recent next-generation air dominance fighter contract for the F-47, things could be taking a hopeful turn. Next, I will pass it over to Amarani, who will go over key issues that led to the disconnect between narratives.
The key issue that we're highlighting is this: ambition led to oversight. Boeing has worked really hard to position itself as a leader in safety, innovation, and global aviation. At least that's the story that they have consistently told the public. But in reality, especially during the development of the 737 MAX, their ambition led for them to compete with Airbus and try to deliver planes faster, which then led to major safety compromises and huge internal communication failures. Instead of reinforcing the narrative of being a safety-first company, decisions were made that put pressure on engineers, they rushed timelines, and also limited transparency with both internal factors and regulators. This disconnect between Boeing's public messaging and their internal action created a huge credibility gap. The public still remembers the crashes, the recalls, and the whistleblower reports. So even when Boeing talks about progress, many stakeholders continue to question whether the company has actually changed. And this is the core of the disconnect. We see a company that talks about safety, but whose past actually suggests otherwise. And now that we've identified this key issue, I will pass on to Kurt, who will walk us through the stakeholders that are most affected by this disconnect, and also how they each play a role in its broader impact.
Appreciate that, Amarani. So now that we know the root problem, the next step is figuring out who's feeling the impact. I'll break down the main stakeholder groups Boeing needs to focus on and how to rebuild trust with each one. We looked at 3 groups that are seriously impacted by Boeing's current challenges. First, there are the stakeholders, the people investing in the company and counting on it to deliver long-term value. Then we have the airline customers and the flying public. Basically, the people Boeing planes are bought to and sold, and the people that fly on them every day. And finally, there's the U.S. Department of Defense, which works closely with Boeing on military aircraft and systems. To understand how Boeing should be communicating with each of these groups, we used the 4-step model. Let's break it down, starting with shareholders. They're invested both financially, emotionally, and right now, they're looking for signs that Boeing is getting back on track. But their concerns aren't quite as urgent as day to day. They want to see that Boeing is stabilizing, recovering financially, and being honest about what's happening. So the best move here is to keep communication consistent, think financial updates, and strong leadership visibility. Next up, the airline customers and passengers. These folks have a ton of influence in how Boeing's performing is financially, and they need reassurance fast. Incidents like the Alaska Airlines door plug issue shook people's confidence. This group wants to know that Boeing is fixing the root problems. Boeing needs to be loud and clear, own the mistakes, show the fixes, and prove to passengers that flying on a Boeing plane is still safe. And then there's the Department of Defense. They're trusting Boeing with mission critical defense equipment. This is another high priority group with both power and demand urgency. Boeing needs to keep the DoD in the loop with regular updates, show they're following every requirement, and make it clear that they're still a dependable partner for national security projects. Figure out who Boeing needs to respond to first. We use the salience model, which looks at power, legitimacy, and urgency. The DoD and airline customers both come out on top as what we call definitive stakeholders. On the other hand, what the model would call dominant stakeholders are the shareholders. They're still important and influential, but with slightly less urgency as they are more focused on long-term success rather than the day-to-day. This kind of stakeholder mapping helps Boeing avoid a one-size-fits-all response. Instead, they can tailor their communication to exactly what each group needs to hear. So now that we've identified who matters most and how they're impacted, Jacob's going to take it from here and explain how Boeing can start closing the gap between its public message and what these key stakeholders are actually experiencing.
Hello, my name is Jacob, and the next couple slides I'll be covering will be about communication objectives and how Boeing can address the internal and external narratives following the company after the recent events. If Boeing is to change these narratives, they will need a strong communication objective that can regain the trust in the public and keep employees on the same page. The root cause behind the recent issues with Boeing aircrafts become clear when viewing some of the publicized negative narratives the company was working under. One important topic of discussion was around the company's emphasis on cutting costs and prioritizing profit as much as possible. This led to shortcuts being taken to have aircrafts completed sooner, as well as utilizing cheaper materials to build and bond planes together. These budget cuts also led them to no longer conducting internal audits, which are far more thorough than the inspections conducted by the FAA. This was a clear call for concern in respect to their customers and pilot safety, as the cut in costs may have boosted their production and revenue, but would come at the expense of quality. Another narrative that leaves no question as to why the company is facing the backlash they are now is that managers were not reporting the issues found during production process to the board of directors. This was a key driver to the whistleblowers putting the company on blast for their poor practices, as the issues were rarely, if ever, making it to the leadership above. Without managers being transparent about issues they were witnessing or discovering, changes were never implemented and didn't prevent issues from leading to tragic events. Moving forward, if Boeing is to create a stronger work environment and retain their status as an aviator leader, they will need to focus on a communication objective that emphasizes quality over cutting costs, along with holding managers accountable for not ensuring strong and clear communications around all topics to aircraft pertaining to aircraft manufacturing. If Boeing is to change the external narrative surrounding their company, they will need a communication objective that focuses on being transparent with the customers and building back trust with the public. Prior to the whistleblowers and aircraft failure incidents, Boeing was a highly regarded aviation company that the public rarely cast a doubt upon. However, with Boeing being in the recent headlines for all the wrong reasons, customers are aware of the narrative surrounding the company and may be less trusting in what the company's goals are. Boeing will have to focus on not only changing the internal narratives behind their mistakes, but also fighting against the more negative narratives being brought on from customers and news outlets. If Boeing is to change the way they are viewed by the public, they will need to be transparent and honest about changes they are making moving forward, along with directly stating how they are addressing issues with their aircrafts. Boeing has a few ways they can rewrite the external narratives around the company and create a new communication objective moving forward. They can achieve this by keeping their public communication team informed of procedural changes as well as changes in leadership. The public can stay better informed around what the company is doing to address the issues previously faced. If the public feels they can trust in the changes Boeing is making, the narrative seen in recent headlines will soon be a thing of the past for the company and will become overshadowed by the new positive changes they've begun implementing and sharing.